successful company always have emotional debate because that's the power to unleash diversity.
Just to give everyone listening also a bit of a background, we're currently in a podcast studio at the yearly Oslo Business Forum at Lillestrøm. So we're sitting here in a spacious, I would say, podcast studio, and we're going to have this delightful conversation.
And it's a beautiful venue.
Before we get into talking about the topics that we are going to discuss today, I would just rather start with, what book are you reading at the moment? Or do you have a favorite book at the moment?
I love the way you position the question is my favorite book at the moment, right? Yeah. Because I do find myself changing my taste all the time. And sometimes when I read a book, at the moment, I don't really get it. But afterwards, because the idea already seated in your mind, when you read something else, it jumps out at you. So my current favorite is called The Power Broker, talking about Robert Moses and the fall of New York. It's a classic. It really is a classic. It was written and published back in the 70s. But every time you go to visit New York, any major bookstore, you still see the book because it is such a monumental documentation of describing this, a bureaucrat essentially, Robert Moses, how he becomes the best and the most powerful builder arguably in the world, because he shaped the entire urban landscape of New York. But it also contained a cautionary tale, how power can corrupt even idealistic individual. As his power grew, he becomes blind and deaf to criticism. He ignored all the rallying cries of discontent, and by the time he lost his power, it becomes inevitable. So it's almost describing within a democratic society and system, power can still utterly corrupt us. And it's a cautionary tale for leaders and individuals to stay humble, to keep arrogance at bay.
Very relevant. We'll come back to that because in terms of looking also in the times we are in today, geopolitically, right? Let's move on that trail in terms of what is like on your mind these days. What are you seeing, talking about, hearing? Share what's top of your mind.
Oh gosh, I think people are frantic. People are scared.
Of what?
AI, technology, everything moving so fast. And it's like, in 5 years, do I still have my job? Is my industry still viable? Or geopolitics. In the US, election is coming up. There's so much, uncertainty surrounding us. And as a result, even within a business environment, people want certainty. And the danger is, let's do some scenario planning, let's do some, demand forecasting, and use that number as a safety blanket psychologically. Meanwhile, there's a lot of unknowable. So I think it's in this juncture, the job of a leader sometimes is to slow things down, to slow down the psychology of your team, to focus what is not changing, what is not changing. Because even when things are moving fast, there are things that are unchanging, and you can actually build a business around the unchanging as well.
Because we talk about people being afraid of AI coming out, digitalization is nothing new, AI is also nothing new. And I feel like in time we've been frantic about different things, but we've been frantic and we've been stressful. Also when digitalization came in, when the internet came in. Because you said, the job of a leader is to create certainty around, what's not changing. But I was also thinking, isn't it also about creating or embracing change or embracing uncertainty as a positive driver instead of something that's negative, more or less?
Exactly. So I remember a quote by Jeff Bezos of Amazon, right? So he said, oftentimes people ask him, what is going to change in the next 10 years? And, now, of course, Gen AI is all in full rage. But like you just mentioned, right, you just hinted during the pandemic, it was blockchain, it was Bitcoin. And then before that, it was digital transformation, predictive analytics. It's just that things are come and go. So Jeff Bezos answered that question by saying, but nobody asked him what is not changing. And he said it's the second question even more interesting and more fundamentally important, because it's only by identifying things that are stable, then you could scale a business around that. So what is not changing? He was talking about the burst of the dot-com bubble. What is not changing is all the infrastructure, the broadband. They're not going to disappear. Even the stock market is in full plunge. So that means that ubiquitous connectivity will stay with us. As Amazon, what do? Well, you need to scale up, going beyond just selling books and CD to apparel, to shoes, to electronic books, all the way to Kindles. And I think today, what leaders need to reassure their team members, or if I'm individual contributor, right? There are areas I know that continue to be important. The domain knowledge continue to be important. So say you are a medium-sized drug maker, pharmaceutical companies, or you are a medium-sized auto part maker. What you know about vehicle safety, what you know about patient safety, these are domain knowledge that are critical. What you need to reframe ourselves is, all right, I just need to develop a second leg of expertise, blending the old and the new, so that my contribution will be unique and invaluable. And I've seen again and again, from summer intern working in a factory of a food and beverage company, all the way to the chief scientist in a pharmaceutical company, because they're so curious. They're willing to learn, to pick up a new skill. And by the time they blend in the two skills together, my God, their contribution is just outsized compared to with their peer group. And to me, that's the future-ready definition at the individual level.
Because what you're saying here, what struck me, and I've thought about it a lot, is sort of how do you balance, right, the stable and unstable? Well, more so say. Because if you think about balancing innovation, because that's sort of where leaders are standing, right? We need to balance innovation and R&D and what's coming, but also day-to-day operational excellence. And those are two sort of streams that are very difficult to balance, because at the end of the day, if you need to prioritize, most likely you will prioritize what's right ahead of you for next quarter or next year than, the focus on the next 5 years. Also in a time where there's a lot of cost cutting, budget thought, I experienced that, innovation budgets are most likely often the ones that goes the first, right? So what's your reflections around how you balance those two?
Yeah, that's a really good question because for the longest time, I thought it is a tension. Like you said, executive needs to balance or managers need to balance between the two extremes. But in fact, I think it's the wrong framing. What organization needs to do, and it really realized, and this realization came to me, once we start to track 160 companies across 6 different industries, we track which organization can both deliver today as well as having an extraordinarily strong product pipeline. What's interesting is the leading companies, they actually do both at the same time, meaning they perform and transform at the same time. Then you ask how? How do they do that? Well, there are 4 major different levels I could go into, but number one, simplification. It's regardless of size. There are organizations I come across, a medium-sized family-owned business. My God, it's so complex. Every red tape here and there. And then you have, say, payment tech giants such as MasterCard and Visa Card. I mean, we're talking about $400, $500 billion company. But the process is so codified, things are relatively transparent internally. As a result, managers do not need to ask for permission. They know what is allowed, what is not allowed, and they could pull together a small team to make things happen. That's agility by definition. But what you see there is through slow work. As the world moves faster, you need to slow down to do the slow work. Clean up the kitchen, simplify, standardize. Then you can automate. So these two are not pulling each other in opposite direction. In fact, in order to be very agile in the marketplace, your supply chain better be simple and simplified. Otherwise, we just cannot move fast. So when people said it's a tension between the two, it's a reflection of silo thinking, not systematic thinking. And I think this is what, even if I'm some intern individual contributor, I can identify where my contribution can go. Because what you want is always the asset to the organization. And also then, if I want to move across different organizations, I would pay attention to what extent this is a red tape everywhere kind of firm, or this is actually the organization have gone through some slow work, eat medicine, and so that whatever you do, you're just in the flow.
But how do you then, what do you see are some of the successful indicators or, of building these type of innovation ecosystems, or these ecosystems where you're able to maybe not balance because that's the way of saying it, but how do you build that kind of ecosystem in a business?
So that simplification and that easy to do business, of course, at some point, some organization know how to externalize it. So it's not just making easy for colleagues from supply chain, manufacturing, R&D, and sales and marketing internally communicate better. But increasingly, we see the way they partner up with external. Finance is a great example, right? There are leading banks that really open themselves up. I'm thinking about in Singapore, there's DBS, a regional bank, but my God, it's a fintech company. Although historically, they are one of these old, slow-moving legacy bank. But over the years of the 30 years, they just slowly doing the slow work, the painful process to make themselves agile.
Such as what?
So first off, right? Completely to the cloud, everything to the cloud. And then also they make sure all the internal communication is either automated or become very explicit. If you want to innovate, here are the explicit guidelines. And then they make these to be transparent to external as well. So that if you're a small little fintech provider in Malaysia, you find it relatively easy to do business with DBS compared to other major banks. And that's a competitive advantage. The beauty of this, you can actually measure it. We actually measure it. And so you could identify quantitatively which organization is future ready. So these days, there's no secret when it comes down to business performance.
But how do you then, in a world that's becoming increasingly fragmented geopolitically and the competitiveness, right? More and more companies are imitating, the time between innovation and becoming mainstream is also shorter. How can companies maintain, also create a competitive edge on the global stage when, things are moving faster and faster, things are becoming more and more uncertain? What's your reflections around that?
Yeah, so I think it even have a deeper implication to countries and policymakers these days, right? Because if you're looking at every election, they talk about jobs. And it is no secret that in the Western world, whether it's Europe or US, we see the hollowing out of manufacturing sector. You looking at even chipset design. It's out in Asia. The biggest manufacturer is TSMC out in Taiwan. From NVIDIA or to Microsoft, they do not fabricate chipset. You're looking at PC and home appliances, it's all made in Asia. It's not a story of China. Before China, there's South Korea and Taiwan and, Japanese as well. So I think this is why we have this geopolitical tension and a global backlash of globalization and outsourcing. But then there is one industry showed us the way forward. And I think it illustrates the principle that every company needs to think about. It's not asking for tariffs. It's not lobbying Washington for support. But if you're looking at a global pharmaceutical company, hey, you're looking at Switzerland, right? In Basel, you have Roche and Novartis. They've been around for 200 years. I mean, if you compare that sector with cars, this little Swiss company should have no chance. And they're still leading the way. And I'm sort of trained as business historian, right? So I get, geekish around what happened. So I went to Basel and understand the long history of Novartis, right? 200 years along River Rhine. So it turns out in the 19th century, let me tell you a little story. In the 19th century, these are chemical manufacturers. They make chemical dye for the textile industry. So the first painkillers of the world was actually an invention by accident by a little company out in Frankfurt. The Swiss have no patent law. They invite these local chemists to imitate foreign invention. Then you start to realize after Second World War, all the drugs are not based on organic chemistry anymore. It's all about the study of microbes, the antibiotics. So the knowledge moved from organic chemistry to microbiology. Today is what? Genomics, mRNA. Induce immune system to fight cancer, for instance. So what you see, the secret sauce for Novartis and Roche, Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, this century-old company, is because they move from old capability and integrate with the new. Now you compare to a car, a very stark contrast. Until most recently, it's mechanical engineering. So what that means is organization must scale new capability. Tariffs can put up a temporary stop. But BYD is building plants out in Europe now. So it's not going to be a long-lasting success.
But you say scaling new capabilities and going back again, right, to what we talked about with prioritization, right? Yeah. Smaller, slimmer budgets. You need to prioritize how are we spending money? How are we making money? How do you prioritize scaling something that is in the future or where you're not seeing revenue immediately and having to, argument for that?
Oh, I love it. Because it is requiring argument around it. And I think organization that could not scale new capability, like what you said, time is good, we invest. Time is bad, we shut it all down. It's because there's no shared viewpoint. There's no shared viewpoint simply because people are not willing to endure an emotional debate. And you need to. Successful companies always have emotional debate because that's the power to unleash diversity. Sometimes I go into a company, I see the C-suite, or you go to a department, right? It's rainbow colors. Gender, nationality, country origin, industry background. But they don't have the right form of rule of engagement. They go down the path of artificial harmony. They're very polite. They smile. They're very nice people. But when they go to a meeting, everyone kind of smile and nodding their head, but fully knowing the moment they leave the conference room, they do whatever they like. That's artificial harmony. Now, great company can prioritize. They have a huge debate, task-oriented debate, but with high trust. So I call it like, hot debate with love. I mean, organizations do come with different size and shape, and there are extremely short-term organizations. But I always see like, any organization can always define a market so small that they are worldwide number one and be happy around it. And honestly speaking, financial market actually see some companies are growth-oriented companies. Some companies are just a damn cash cow. So, of course, we could always delegate upward. My boss doesn't allow me, and I sometimes even his CEO, my supervisory board doesn't allow me. Supervisory board say the investor wouldn't allow it. And yet, when you're looking at the share price of any companies, innovation does matter. If you're a drug maker, if you are not running out of drug pipeline, your share price would tank. If you're a home appliance maker, if they see your new product coming along, it's not a big splash, people are not buying it, and you keep on using the old portfolio, there are big questions being answered. And let me give you a very concrete idea, right? Microsoft, under the former CEO Steve Ballmer, you're actually looking at the EBITDA growth, profit growth, is a cash machine. Every year, the earnings continue to grow, but the share price actually slowly decline. Why? They get stuck with the PC market. Because everybody knows there is no growth prospect. No matter how much you squeeze the bottom line, it's not going to move the needle. In fact, they get punished. And so it's just the whole idea, the investor wouldn't allow you to invest. I think it's oversimplistic sometimes, or being even used as an excuse. In fact, what investor wants to know is when you invest in the future, hey, what are the leading indications you're on the right track? Do customers want it? Is there enough love to show to external, like NPS, Net Promoter Score? Are you on the right track? What about your customer churn? These are the leading indicator that, in fact, the financial market sometimes pay attention to. And of course, it's the job for senior leader to also turn the narrative as well. So it's a combination of area, but simply say, I'm not allowed to do this, it feels a little helpless. It's a learned helplessness.
Well, it makes a lot of sense when you say it in that way as well, when you break it down the way that you're saying. But if we also look at one of the, call it major forces that's reshaping several industries, and we're seeing, we talk about sustainability a lot, right? Climate change being a driver for this. We're seeing, innovation in the space. And there's also an increasing pressure on business from a regulatory perspective, from customers, from stakeholders to adapt to sustainable practices and also to explore sustainable business opportunities as well, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you think companies can use innovation as a tool, not just to meet the demands, but to create new business opportunities around sustainability?
So there are two parts, right? One is the mandate of sustainability is almost the license to operate. So it's really around the near-term delivery. If you're not doing so, you lose the license to win. And then there's the second part, as you said, because it is an important area, and no single company could do real impact around our environmental footprint until you partner up with someone else. And so organizations that simplify the internal process, that make partnership actually easier, are the one who are positioned to tapping into this wave of growth. Because sustainability part of it, of course, is around our environmental footprint. But if you're looking at services, it's also inclusive financing, for instance. And if you think about that mode, then there are lots of go-to-market partners needs to be involved. If you are so clunky and bureaucratic and everything is based on manual coordination, guess what? It's just hard for some innovator, some startup to partner up with you. The last thing you want is to pick winner. Whether it's around sustainability or whether this is about traditional product innovation, picking winner upfront is risky. What you want is to create an architecture of your organization so that everyone can partner up with you easily. Something is bound to pop.
But then one challenge that comes up when you focus your innovation around sustainability and trying to get that from being something that you're exploring to something that you want to become a bigger part of your business, we talk about, profitability. Very often, a lot of the solutions around sustainability may not be the most profitable. We're looking at earning the same profit from the same maybe brown or unsustainable practices into the sustainable practices. And you challenge that, the profitability discussion or getting the client on board, getting customers engaged to choosing the practices, because we have customers saying, we care about it, but then the purchasing decisions and patterns are not, matching and adding up. So how do we meet, we're expecting the same profit, the same revenues from the unsustainable to the sustainable?
I love it, because what you're describing, the crux is the transition. So it requires going back to our early beginning. You require shared viewpoint. Because when it comes down to the transition, if we are only thinking incrementally, right, there's just too much noise around us. Regulation may change or may not change. You could do all kinds of scenario planning. Guess what? None of these are useful. Seriously. I mean, things could change overnight. Now, on the other hand, we could operate in a world that the whole company comes together. Okay, in 5 or 7 years, what kind of company we want to know for? If we continue to command the brand value consumer would love, if we still command the respect across the world reputationally, what kind of company we want to become? Work backwards then, thinking about, okay, so what is my next quarter trade-off? Do I still work with this particular customer or do I not? You don't need to be perfect overnight, but you need to start from today. And in the second scenario, the everyday choice, I bet, is infinitely different than just incremental without an end goal. And put it the other way, oftentimes the most urgent thing is never the most important thing. The most important thing never scream at you. Now, again, going back to future-ready individual, right? Using that mindset, if some of your listeners are thinking about sustainability is my true passion, whether it's, inclusive society, whether this is environmental footprint, doesn't mean that you need to completely move into an activist role overnight and self-sacrifice yourself on the corporate environment. You just want to figure out in 7 years and 5 years down the road, what kind of individual I want to become. And starting off next Monday, are there projects inside the company I want to involve a little bit because it helps you grow a new skills that you would just love to engage. And I think getting that flowed, it just make life so much more interesting with an end goal in mind.
What would you say are sort of the factors where a company have successfully redefined itself in response to, disruption or changing environments around you? If there's any key differentiators or key elements there that we can learn from?
Yeah, for one thing, of course, like earlier we mentioned, they perform and transform at the same time. They scale up new capability in a constant basis. But the lever we've seen is a very clear shared viewpoint, where we want to become. Work backwards, what is the critical trade-off? Embrace this tough conflict and debate along the way. But I give you one more. Really keep complacency at bay. They constantly reframe themselves to almost belittle themselves, To the point, it's like, really? But you guys are not so bad. But they would be almost like, I remember this quote by the former CEO of Intel, long passed away, Andy Grove, legendary CEO, right? Intel today weren't so good anymore. But under Andy Grove, this is the hero of Silicon Valley. And he wrote a book, the title of the book, Only the Paranoid Survive. Only the paranoid survive.
What does that mean?
Well, you've got to keep your complacency at bay. You think you're that big? Go outside and look at the world. You're nothing. And so I think it's this humbleness to understand that, in our own little defined market, we may be worldwide number one, but guess what? You're looking around, all these interesting disruptors around. We may not even meet the basic mandate in certain dimension. You mentioned sustainability. We could always question around that. Have we done enough? That reframing from, you think yourself an absolute hero to, we're not so good yet. That becomes an opportunity for manager and individual to grow again.
When you work, you run the Center for Future Readiness, and I very much care about and very passionate about getting companies to think about that. But are there any dilemmas when you work with executives, when you in your research that you see when companies are working to become future ready, either if it's within the companies or external factors?
One of the key tension is the following, right? It always comes back to culture. It always comes back to culture. And time again, I see organizations that are most future ready. They could innovate with extreme autonomy, and yet without losing control. They have to embrace the cultural transparency.
What does culture transparency mean?
It's almost like no secret.
Being open towards your employees.
Yeah. So there are organizations I've seen, the strategy, they sanitize and sanitize and sanitize. And by the time you're getting into the operating level, it's like some pictures. There are organizations don't care. We're just going to have a centralized database. If people want, they could go check. They know how things work, where things are. Now, not that they don't care about secret getting leaked out. Of course, every employee will sign NDA, and they have a legal team to enforce. But the policy is clear. Now, why do we need that? Because I think we humans are genuinely curious. If you want people to do the right thing, they need to know the know-how as well as the know-why. Because in the end, every day, everyone is making decisions. And the strategy of an organization is the accumulation of result, thousands and tens of thousands of everyday decisions being added up. That's your strategy. This is why you need that transparency. But that means, the company and senior leader cannot just hoard information and look smart because they have some secret information in conference call. They look the smartest. They would get exposed if they don't do their homework. And so there are companies knows that our enemy is out there or our competition is out there. There are companies who got it wrong. They think, internal competition is the biggest thing.
So what you're talking about is requirements of, I'm not sure, a new type of leadership, but definitely a different type of leadership in terms of transparency, how you're getting everyone on board on this shared viewpoint that I like, because it's a shared viewpoint with getting everyone engaged. It's not the innovation department that's going to transform a company while you're performing, right? There needs to be that transition, and you need to be able to endure that transition.
Yes. And I always associate those leaders is love with toughness. Like almost an athletic coach, right? Athlete coach. That they are so candid in their feedback. When things are not working well, they never shy of having a difficult conversation. But it comes from a place of honesty, and some people would call it love, but it's radical sort of candor that goes with hand in hand with transparency, right? And so this is not the misinterpretation of just being nice. In fact, a lot of the company told me they embrace psychological safety, but I think how they interpret the concept was wrong. What Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School described about psychological safety is actually very brutal, honest feedback to one another, with love and trust endorsed behind. It's not the tolerate of mediocre performance. So sometimes this concept actually getting abused across company. This is not artificial harmony. So I would say, yes, it does require different type of leadership. This is not command and control, but this is also not consensus building and, we just sing songs together. But this is, we're going to debate. The diversity of thoughts is important, but after engagement of the discussion, then everyone would implement with backbones. And there would be consequence if you don't speak up, but then you sort of passive-aggressive or blocking the change. So it's love with toughness.
And clarity, I would say, a clear direction in what you're saying, right? We're going here and getting everyone on board towards that.
Right. And I see those behaviors really gender neutral, nationality neutral. That type of behavior is universally admired.
If we were to get into your current mind today, where in terms of what you're doing at your work or what you're seeing, what companies are sort of have risen up for you that you think are inspiring, or where you think that they're really onto something? Any companies that you're seeing that it's sort of your look to currently, old or new, or?
Well, I'll tell you a company that I get obsessed with lately. Not that they are doing extraordinarily well, because right now they're actually going through some tough patch. But I think they are still having an extremely strong foundation, and I'm rooted for their resurgence, and that's Nike actually.
Why would you say that it's going it's tough?
So right now they are really going some tough patch because they missed their revenue growth lately, and they have just a change of CEO last week. John Donahoe, who led the company during the pandemic with extraordinary revenue growth, but then growth stopped and they lose their coolness. So
why do you think that is?
They scale up new capability while forgetting about the past, the domain knowledge I mentioned. So
in what way?
What's very interesting is the CEO just stepped down. John Donahoe is an IT guy. So he came from the world of PayPal and eBay, kind of the world. And he really pushed that, Nike.com, omni-channel to a new height no one could imagine. And during the pandemic, of course, they win a lot. But then what happened is he almost took his approach and background from the IT world and imposed onto the fashion world completely. And a lot of people left. The connection with the best athlete got lost. And so the coolness, because fashion is always about coolness, right?
Yeah.
You need the real opinion leader. You need the community of tennis player or field runner to think your stuff is cool, and they kind of radiate out. And they also move away from this, skateboard store, the cool shop from Soho to Brooklyn. And so they lose their cool. So that's the mistake. So what taught me is, as companies scale up new capability, what you know in the past, you cannot forget. So it's, again, pharma firm, do not forget about patient safety. Fashion, the emotion by design, do not forget about that. Meanwhile, of course, you need to build up that new capability. Otherwise, you would be falling behind.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I'm still rooted in Nike because now they have Elliot Hill, who is a Nike veteran coming in. And if I'm looking at their financial fundamental, Nike is in good shape. This is a company still the largest in the industry. They have no debt. The revenue is strong. I mean, they just need to recognize the problem early. And what's interesting is Phil Knight, as well as the chairman, Mark Parker, before the company go off the ground, they already make these difficult changes already. This is not Nokia standing on a burning platform. This is a company foreseeing if we don't do something radical, things might really become bad. So let's bring our old, new veteran coming back in just to steer back the company. Meanwhile, we continue to innovate. So, time will tell. But it's interesting change.
Are there any industries here different industries that can learn from each other? Because what you're explaining here is not, every company has met some tough times, like you're saying. But are there any things that they can learn from each other?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the key lesson learned here is there are times the company fall into two categories. So if you're looking at auto industry, a lot of the traditional car company are now, trying to move up and scramble up to learn about software to become a software first car company. And so that is the key lesson that we learn. If you don't have a shared viewpoint, you cannot ever scale up new capability. These would always be a small experiment on the sideshow. On the other hand, what Nike have taught us, and in many ways even Starbucks just taught us recently, is that you forget about your past. You lose your core identity. Starbucks is about third place. It's about this unparalleled consumer customer experience. Nike is about coolness. And you kind of lost that. Now, when I think about that, oh gosh, don't forget about the core mission of your organization. Boy, whether you are a bank, whether you're advertisement agency, we've got to keep that in mind.
So let's. I think we need to get into landing. We've talked a lot about executives, obviously, because you also work with a lot of them. For any person in an organization or in a business, what can I do? What are your thoughts on, are there any habits, practices, ways of working or thoughts or,
Yeah. Gosh, curiosity, number one. Number one, really important because, we are all born curious. Oftentimes when people join organization early part of their career, they're also curious. But it's just human nature from time to time. Very soon we get comfortable and we forget because today it is so important. It's beyond just a T-shape. T-shape is you develop a deep expertise. You still have, a horizon, what's going on. But I think today you actually need an N shape. You need two deep expertise. And so again, when I see managers, individual contributor, their influence is outsized because they tended to have unique knowledge no one has. It comes down to their own curiosity. So say a financial controller, for some reason, they just love to understand the world of marketing. So they keep on working on cross-project and eventually they know enough. And then of course, to make sure any product launch is successful, with the knowledge of marketing and finance, you're going to win. And what sociologists have told us is people who kind of build up this capability or skill set, they have a very different network among their acquaintance. They probably well tap into the network of financial people and another network of marketeers, and they are the brokers of knowledge transfer. Now, that is something AI cannot displace you. You want to be the hub of information flow. Because like it or not, they are the one who control this informal power. And if you happen to have external connection, wow, you ride on the industry wave.
Very interesting. You've introduced so many keywords that I've been writing down here. Broker of knowledge transfer to finding that way. But that I actually also have one more question I need to ask you that I forgot. Also, are there any trends or topics or anything that you think are currently underappreciated or misunderstood?
So of course, right now, when everyone is talking about Gen AI, this human artisan, handcraft get completely sort of de-emphasized. But if you're looking at, product getting commoditized, there's always a new differentiation. This is the way I see it, right? Every time when something getting commoditized, another layer becomes the brand differentiation. So I think, whether it's in the manufacturing sector that done with human hand, when well done now, the command differentiation would get accelerated. That's right. That's it. I think this is just, maybe I live in Switzerland. I have a bias for the Swiss watchmaking industry, the timepiece by Richemont and things. I mean, despite all these wave of disruption, it is still a viable industry. But you need to be world-class. What that means is, as an organization, you need to leverage all the AI to keep your costs low so that you deploy your remaining human employee to focus on the really creative spark on top.
Thank you so much, Howard. This has been
pleasure.
This has been so good.
Such fun.
This has been such fun. So if you're going to leave our listeners with one advice, one main reflection from this episode, what would that be?
So I'm a little bit of a bookworm. So my advice would be read as much as possible. Just read as much as possible. AI can summarize something for you, but reading gives you pleasure. It gets you into perspective, a human condition that in your lifetime, in my lifetime, we will not experience. And to understand how other humans experience life and how they react would be differently and project yourself in their shoes is a joy, but that also makes us human. And I think this is just precious. And also Warren Buffett advised young people, right? Read as much as possible. He claimed he read 500 pages per day. I don't know how he read it, but he said knowledge is like compound interest. You keep compounding it. Future readiness is a game of inch. You inch up your colleagues. You have a slight advantage, an inch, but keep compounding it. Before you know, it's miles away.
So that's a great advice for our listeners. And I think we'll end with that. Thank you so much for coming, sharing reflections and thoughts with me and us.
Thank you, Danat. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you so much for listening in. And as we say, vi høres.